There, guys, welcome back to the channel and to another video. It's been quite long and it is also Inktober. Finally, the season for artists has started, and for these 31 days, I have prepared 31 beautiful illustrations for you. So, let's go along on this journey together, and I'll just let you look at this sketch. We'll talk a bit, and I'll let you relax. So, grab a cup of coffee and start watching. So the first prompt was backpack. Now, let me just get this clear. In most of the Inktober illustrations which I've done before this, I have focused mainly on character designs, and that I have done quite a lot, it seems. So this time, what I tried was I wanted to focus more on these landscape designs, on environments, and try sketching them out in ink. Let me tell you that it did prove really tough to do that because I didn't have much experience regarding it. But nonetheless, I was able to achieve some success, and obviously, you will be the judge of how these illustrations turn out. So, for the first one, backpack, I really wanted to show this man carrying a huge burden, sort of a whole plethora of supplies, which he wanted to somehow take to his base camp and dump it because it was so heavy. And what I'm making right here is sort of a makeshift backpack, you might say. He's carrying this sniper rifle, and slowly, this world around him is going to turn into a post apocalyptic scenario. And yep, that is a teaser into what is going to come. Now, as I started making this illustration, one more thing which I wanted to master was the art of drawing from memory, of drawing without looking at reference images. Now, obviously, I was looking at reference images, but it was only for some pose references or just to look at the texture of the various things. And that was it. I was not copying any kind of assets from these reference images. Yes, I did do it for a couple of illustrations, but that was it. Now, obviously, using references is not a bad thing, but if you want to become an experienced master illustrator, what you need is a good visual library, as I've always said. And to build that, you need to start drawing from imagination, from memory. Now, drawing from imagination doesn't always mean that you will be drawing the wrong thing. Obviously, you need to observe and look at a lot of visual assets, a lot of things, and remember how they look. So, for instance, the glasses which I'm drawing here, the face cover for this character, the sort of headpiece which he is wearing, all these things, I am not looking at pictures of these things and drawing them. It is out of my memory. And obviously, you need to remember how the glasses actually sit on a person's face, how they sit on the nose, and the frame sits on the ear, how the earpiece will look from a specific angle. And you get all these things into your brain, you are able to analyze all these things once you start becoming a good observer. If you have looked at illustrations by Kim Jung-hee, the master, he is a pro at drawing from memory. And he used to say this very often, that he looked at such a huge amount of comic books, pictures, and actual real life objects that he was able to remember everything. Remember how everything looked from almost every angle. And this he employed into his artworks. Particularly in this Inktober, my focus was to do the same. Whenever I was not taking reference from some image, I was trying very hard to imagine and think how this specific thing might look in real life, how this specific cloth or this specific object will look in a 3D space, and draw it as per my convenience from an angle which I wanted in my illustration. Now, moving over to the techniques which I use. Having a pencil under drawing for your ink illustrations is a good thing, especially if you're starting off or you are drawing from imagination and planning out your illustration on the go. Because what a pencil sketch allows is flexibility, which ink does not. Ink is a highly inflexible, highly permanent, and indelible medium. Once you have made something in ink, it stays there and it's not going away anytime soon. So, obviously, having a pencil under drawing, especially when you are planning your illustration on the go, is a very good thing. And that is what I follow in most of my ink illustrations too. The fact that you are drawing monochromatic, that is, you are using just one color, that is black, onto a white paper or any kind of other white medium, it means that you are liable to making mistakes and not being able to cover up those mistakes. And I really hate using those white pigments because it changes the texture of the paper and the lines will never fall in the same place as you had planned. So yeah, it's best to avoid those white pigments, any kind of cover-ups. Obviously, yes, if you have to use it, if it is a final illustration, then go for it. There is absolutely no issues there. But it's just my personal preference to not use it. Now, as you can see, what I do just prior to starting the inking is I lightly erase off some of the places where the lead has fallen heavily onto the paper. Because if the pencil lead, the graphite, is still stuck onto the paper, the ink doesn't really absorb well. And when it comes to erasing and cleaning up the line work, it is only then that you will feel, oh my goodness, the line work has faded away. So to avoid this, before starting off with your inking process, you should just slightly rub off the excess graphite from the paper and keep the underdrawing so light that only you can see it and you know where to exactly place all your objects. Shading. Shading in ink is a very tricky thing, I feel, because you can use a multiple variety of techniques. You can just use these straight lines, you can use cross hatching, you can just darken up that part of the image, you can use ink washes. There are just so many techniques to be used when drawing with ink. So this first illustration actually felt like a warm-up, and I wasn't using an ink wash at this point. I hadn't prepared my ink wash, in fact. I use India ink for my ink washes, and I'll explain it in a later illustration how I exactly use this and how I layer it. But for this one, what I did was a lot of cross hatching, a lot of these sort of etching lines, and I used a lot of shadows with dry brushes. And dry brush techniques are pretty good if you are an intermediate or experienced artist, but if you are a beginner, I would say that before trying these dry brush techniques of just rubbing off this sort of dry ink onto a rough textured paper, you should really practice it beforehand so that you don't ruin your final image. Coming to the paper, the type of paper which I use. There are many ink illustration artists who love to use this smooth paper, this highly smooth paper, almost like ivory sheets, and that is really good if you want to get these smooth lines and this amazing sort of clean line work. But what I personally prefer is this sort of textured sketchbook paper. Not only in sketchbook, but if you can find it, I think Strathmore and some other manufacturers also sell this kind of sheets, which are slightly textured, around ranging from 120 to 180 GSM, and it just really brings out some of that vibe, that feel in the image. And what this kind of paper actually does to the image is it brings out the texture underneath. So anywhere where the light hits the paper, you can actually see those small dimples and irregularities in the paper, and all the blank spaces are really textured and beautiful in the final image. Obviously, you might not be able to see these intricacies in a video, but in an image, in a high quality image, which I usually upload onto my portfolio on Behance or on Instagram, you might be able to spot these. But in real life, in person, this looks really beautiful. I don't know if you have seen it or not, but in really these really old books which used to have sort of colored or even black and white plates of images, which were actually made by printing presses, stamping sort of these rubber stencils or metal etched stencils onto paper. If you look at these, you will be able to find a similar sort of texture, because these old, really old books, the paper deteriorates quite a bit and it leaves sort of the texture behind as it yellows out. From yellowing, another factor comes to play here, is that you should use archival quality inks and papers for your illustrations if you're planning on saving them for your future generations to look at. Because not all papers are made the same. Many of the papers which are bleached to be this sort of artificial bright white are not always archival quality. The whiteness, this whole color, might sustain only for a short period of time, and slowly as time passes, the color will just yellow out and the inks will not be able to hold on to the paper very well. I've seen it happen and it doesn't look good. So I will urge anyone and everyone to go for good quality paper, to go for good quality, archival quality sketchbooks. They are not costly. You just need to look at the tags that the paper is acid free, the paper is not bleached using these harsh chemicals, and it is of archival quality. And the same goes for inks. Acidic inks or certain types of marker inks are not really ideal for preserving your drawings, your images. However, one of the most common types of ink which is available on the market, that is India ink, it is almost always archival quality, because India ink is made from these fine soot particles mostly, and obviously it's a natural thing. It's carbon based ink and it stays on and for a very long time. I mean, I have looked at some of my sketchbooks from 3 or 4 years ago, and the India ink which I've used there, even the lightest of the light washes which I have done, they hold up so very well. So yeah, you should go for these good quality inks and use India ink wherever possible. I mean, India ink has a lot of advantages itself. The fact that it is waterproof upon drying, it is easily available, it is cheap, and it goes into a lot of different type of brush pens, and you can use it even with the finest of fine brushes without any hassle, and you can dilute it with water and use it as a wash. Yeah, it has quite a lot of advantages. Onto the scene setting part for this illustration. What I wanted and what I imagined was this man was hiking, trekking through a mountainous region, almost a very rocky terrain, and he was just struggling to walk across. And that is why he has this stick with him, so that he's able to get a better grip, a good hold on the terrain and move forward. Some harsh shadows also, because the sun is shining down upon him. But obviously, since it is sort of an alpine region, he does have to wear these winter clothes. Again, you can see here that I'm using these dry brush techniques. Now, for making dry brush techniques, you can use the Pentel Feud brush pen, the Feudenosuke, which is pretty efficient at doing it. You can press the body of this brush pen and control the ink flow, and it works really well for these dry brush techniques. Illustrating with ink is a very phase-wise progressive thing. You need to look at your image constantly, you need to look at your image from a distance, from close up, and accordingly shade over the regions again where you think it should be darker. Don't be afraid of making some of the regions really, really dark, because actually when we are looking at color images, we don't realize it, but there are very dark spots in an image. Now, in colored images, you will be able to see muted tones of the color in these, but in a black and white image, they will appear almost black. So, leaving a bit of light behind, you can just darken these portions with full confidence. As for the background, I made some rocky mountains facing the sun, and all the parts which were facing away, I just used some lines and hatching to provide some shading. Also, you can see in the farther distance the river which flows through the sort of valley, and he's standing on sort of a ledge. And yes, there is an open sky with some minimal clouds, and that's it. Now, coming up with ideas for this Inktober, it was a really good experience, and I have tried to continue sort of this storyline with this character at the center of it. So, yeah, you should stay tuned to the channel if you want to see this story progress, because this is just the start. There are 30 more illustrations to go. And with that, I'll let you enjoy the ending part of this illustration. I'll leave you with this ink illustration, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.